Hi, I'm Miss Sarah, and I'm going to be reading a bedtime story for you today. This story is called The Warrior Leader. It says, after Moses died, God gave his people a new leader. The new leader's name was Joshua, which means the Lord saves. Joshua was going to lead God's people into the special land that God had promised to give them. By this time, God's people had been wandering around in the baking desert for 40 years. So you can imagine how sick they were of sand and anything yellow and tense and walking and being hot, and how happy they were to reach the edge of the desert and see their beautiful new home right there in front of them, all cool and green and lovely. But there was only one problem: Jericho. Jericho was a city, but it wasn't just any old city. It was a fortress, and it stopped anyone from getting into the land. So all these beautiful things they couldn't get to because they couldn't get past Jericho, the big city. The people looked at Jericho, at the big, giant, scary walls all around it, at the tall, towering ramparts, at the heavy iron gates bolted shut, and at each other. Whoa. What would they do? No one knew, but God knew. And God told Joshua what to do. But Joshua must have looked surprised because it was a very odd battle plan. Indeed, as soon as we'll find out. Then God made his people a promise. I will always be with you, and I will never leave you. Even if you do what I say, your lives in the land will be happy and everything will go well. So Joshua gathered his army together. They had their swords and their spears and their shields, and they were ready to fight. But the plan wasn't all about fighting. It was about trusting and doing what God said. Joshua's army went marching around the city, day after day after day. They're too scared to fight, the people of Jericho said. They just walked around the city. Let's see. See the city? And they just walked around. But they were wrong. God's people weren't scared. They were waiting. They were waiting for God to tell them what to do next. On the seventh day, God told his people to march around the city, not once, not twice, but 7 times. Then God told everyone to make as much noise as they could. Has anybody told you to make as much noise as you can? We really don't get to do that much, but God told his people to be so loud. Well, imagine that noise. Add 39,999 other people making that noise too, and it would be so loud. You'd probably even have to cover your ears. And as it turned out, it was stone-splitting loud because the huge, strong walls of Jericho just tumbled to the ground as if they were just made of sand, and Jericho vanished in a great dust, and the people cheered. So that was how God's people entered their new home. They didn't even have to fight to get in. They only had to walk around. Joshua said, God has brought you safely here. Now, will you do what he says? Everyone said, we promise. Only God can make your heart happy, Joshua said. So don't pray to pretend gods. No, they said, never. I'm afraid they didn't keep their promise, though. They didn't do what God said, and many years later, just as God warned them, things would go badly for God's people. They would lose their new home. Enemies would capture them and take them off as slaves. And God's people would scatter into many different lands. But God's plan was still working. And one day, he would give his people another leader and another home. But this home, no one could ever take from them. Here's our pictures. And that's our story.